Welcome to Wisdom for Life, where we sit through philosophy to find practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. Hi, I'm Dan Hayes. I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Greg Sadler, and today we're talking about
concerns and controversies over AIs becoming persons. And now it sounds like we're slipping into, I don't know, what do you want to call it, sci-fi, Black Mirror, speculative fiction realm, but I mean, this is where we're going, and I think a lot of people have the idea that we're already there, at least with some of this.
Yeah, it's very cyberpunk at the moment. It's the technology is there, it's just not evenly distributed. Although this technology, at least at low levels, seems to be rather distributable, but that is going to be definitely changed as all the big players are, putting more and more billions into building data centers to
maybe trillions, quite frankly, right?
Right.
I mean, it's a huge developing industry, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So
I believe that.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, Microsoft is building a giant data center for this. That the power consumption is greater than some countries.
That's not a surprise. So we've talked about AI in the last few episodes, and before that we were looking at, let's call it a little bit more mundane and nuts and bolts stuff. We looked at art generators and text generators and how they might affect the world of work and other things along those lines. Now we're delving into the stuff that I think a lot of people find much more fascinating, and it is more speculative, right? Can AIs, artificial intelligences, be persons or something like persons? And I mean, it's not as if there weren't philosophical issues being raised in what we were talking about before, but this is like straight out, what is personal identity? What does it mean to be a person? It's metaphysics, it's epistemology. How can I know that I'm dealing with a real human being? There's ethics involved. There might be other areas of philosophy as well, I suppose, right?
Greg, are you a Nexus 6 replicant?
How would you know? I mean, if we're talking Philip K. Dick, right, and the Nexus 6, apparently some of them don't know that they're actually replicants. They've got these false memories and stuff like that. And then I suppose, leaving a Philip K. Dick book around for the replicant to find would be a bad idea, because then they can get it in their head that maybe they better get somebody to do a Voight Kampf test on them.
Yeah. Well, yes, this is useful because Dick's books often have a theme of not knowing what things are real or not, especially for the main characters, not knowing if the world or the understanding that they have of the world is true for them. So we have to talk about now we're going to create these fake humans, these AIs that are going to be interacting with us, and they potentially are making decisions that are going to affect us in the real world. And how do we, come to terms with them? Where do they fit in our social fabric? And do they break current systems that we've relied upon? And are we at a point where there's no turning back already?
It's interesting. So when we were doing research for this, one of the things we came across is that there's a recent bill that was passed by the Utah legislature called the Utah Legal Personhood Amendment, and it addresses legal personhood, and it forbids governmental entities, so not private entities, from granting or recognizing legal personhood to non-humans. And it's like a laundry list. I think that the people who enacted this, they were like, we better close every loophole we can possibly find. So inanimate objects, bodies of water, atmospheric gases. I don't know that anybody has thought, helium should be a person or something. But they do say you cannot recognize legal personhood in artificial intelligence. So at least in Utah, they're closing that door way ahead of time and saying we're not gonna allow this sort of thing. Everywhere else, it seems to be an open question.
And I find it interesting because we've given legal personhood status to other things.
Corporations.
Exactly. And so it's like, okay, well, You can't have an individual artificial intelligence as a person, but if you have a company that's run by an artificial intelligence, does that get around the loophole there?
It's interesting because let's say you have a whole governing board, right, of like 14 members and then a CEO, and they're all AIs. Not a single one of them, according to that, would be persons, but somehow you mix them together and you get a legal person that has all sorts of rights and privileges and things like that. So yeah, that's
like The Big Short.
That is a significant problem that will have to, sooner or later, a lot of these things will have to be addressed. And, usually what we do is we kick them around in sci-fi and then maybe in philosophy, and eventually they reach the political and legal realm and people actually make decisions, or the economic realm in some of these cases. And there the decision making is perhaps less thoughtfully informed, but it's going to be more decisive, right? So, except for the people who skirt the law or break the law in certain ways.
Right. I can totally see there's going to be a lot of people that are going to potentially use these as ways to, make money in ways that are not the most straightforward, direct way, but are going to be very manipulative. It's going to be I don't know, I don't even want to say it's like advertising, but it's going to be something akin to that on steroids in certain aspects.
I can imagine that will be the case. And I think that's what we have to do with a lot of this is imagine and maybe, articulate concerns. So what kind of AI bots are we considering? We've got a whole bunch of them lined up. What we're hoping to talk about are AI ghost or memorial bots, which are already here. Psychotherapy bots, which, if we lower the bar far enough, they've been around for decades and decades. AI companion bots, customer service or government chatbot personas, medical bots of different sorts, and then, something that's kind of close at home for me, pedagogical chatbot personas. There's the whole idea, and going back to Philip K. Dick, not the stuff that culminates in the Blade Runner movies, but in the Martian time slip novel, there are these teacher bots that are up there on Mars, and they're famous people like Samuel Clemens or President Lincoln or people like that, and they teach the kids, and they're really well organized, and each one has its own persona, and from each of these bots, the kids are not just supposed to learn information. They're supposed to learn a way of approaching problems and other people. So maybe we'll have things like that.
Wouldn't you like to have Aristotle as your tutor, personal tutor?
I don't know. People often ask, like when I do podcast interviews, every once in a while I'll get one of those. It's kind of a stock question. If you could have dinner with any philosopher from any time, who would you pick? And I'm always like, well, I don't know what these people would be like at dinner.
Yeah.
We don't actually have that much to go on. Maybe they'd be picky eaters, or they hog the conversation or stuff like that. It'd be cool to meet Aristotle or Cicero or Anselm of Canterbury or all these people, but you don't really know what they would be like, right? And we'd have the language barrier too. I can read classic Greek, but I sure as hell can't speak it. And Aristotle would consider you or me barbarians and might look down upon us because of that. So,
or not Roman. This also reminds me of the great book The Diamond Age by Neil Stevenson, which is subtitled A Young Lady's Illustrated Primer. And so one of the many different storylines concerns a young girl who has a book that is exactly that. It's a teacher for her. It's an AI powered teacher that is designed in a way that is supposed to always follow along and be able to personalize the teaching for her and her alone.
That would be a kind of a cool thing to have, wouldn't it? But then you might get so spoiled that you can't do traditional education. if you had something that wonderful. There are a few other things that we want to hit on. Hopefully, we'll get to talk. There's a guy, Richard Dawkins, who really made a big splash in this by coining the phrase "counterfeit people," and he's expressing some pretty serious concerns about that we'll have to look into. And there's a lot of really deep issues here about consciousness and agency, personhood, recognition between people. What is it like to have your AI treat you like a human being as opposed to treating you like a bot? Do we grant them rights? What would those look like? It's pretty open right now. This is a pretty vast area for work to be done in.
Yeah, and it's important for us to think about this at least and try to get into the conversation before it actually comes to pass, because it's, at the moment, the train ain't stopping. So
that's a really interesting point. I think you're completely right that we need to have conversations about this, and I think there's some people that are impatient with these conversations. They're like, hey, it's not here, just shut up, we'll deal with it when it comes. And that's not a productive attitude. No. And then there's the people who are like, super positive or super negative, and you can't really have a good conversation with them because they're just like, AI, rah, 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 super great. Or they're like, AI, it's going to Skynet us and kill us all, We want to have real conversations that maybe are a little bit lower stakes, like where we say, we're not going to talk about AI as such, every single AI. We're going to talk about this kind of AI and what are the issues involved with this. So that's a great segue to talking about the very first kind. And these are called by two different names, ghost or memorial bots. And there was, I forget, it was a couple seasons back with Black Mirror, there was something like this. So I think a lot of people are familiar with this. And the idea is that you take data from a dead person, although you could take data from an incapacitated person too, I suppose, and you produce responses and interactions that imitate the departed person and maybe even have an avatar of them. And apparently these are a big going thing in China right now. Maybe they will become something important here. And they tend to be created by family members as ways to deal with grief or loss. Now, I don't know. What do you think? Is this a good way to deal with grief or loss? You're kind of not moving on in a way by keeping them with you.
Questionable. I guess I just also wanted to add in that you can take it not just from like the humans themselves, but like the corpus of their writings or whatnot. That is another way. It's right, less, it's more lossy, but it might be another way to do it. And also, this question is like, oftentimes we as human beings act very differently in different circumstances, and is there any one authentic self? And so is that a thing that can be easily replicated if you're going to do a memorial bot? Like, how I interact with my grandma is going to be differently than how my mother interacted with my grandma, because they have totally different relationships from totally eras. And can you get...
I mean, that's actually... that is a really great point, because we can talk for people, at least right now, pre-internet age, right? When we weren't like making permanent records all the time of our interactions through texting or, phone calls that could be digitized or any of those sorts of things. So if I think about my biological dad, who's I think around 78 or so, we could take the data that we have available, but that would only capture back to, I don't know, like 2000 or something. And you wouldn't have anything from before that. Whereas with me, there's less of a trail with you because you're a bit younger. There's even less of a dead trail, so to speak. And then with, people who were born after the internet became a really going concern, okay, all their stuff is available. But you're still right. What sort of data can we draw on? So with some people, you could take their writings, things they put into a blog or a journal or stuff like that. You've got text messages. You've got maybe phone calls. If they've got some sort of internet presence, you've got what's in social media, YouTube videos. But that's not the person. I mean, I'm not, I've got 3,000 YouTube videos, and I am that guy who made them, but that avatar is not me, the person, because there's a lot of stuff I'm not video recording myself doing,
So that reminds me of, like, especially there's a number of philosophers who've changed their opinions over time.
Right.
One that comes to mind is Jean-Paul Sartre, and we've got, if you're going to make a memorial of him, are you going to make a memorial of him in his 30s or in his 60s?
Yeah.
What version do you want to be talking to? Can you make there's no, like, the prototypical you.
I wonder too, like, how much, even like if we say, okay, that's not that big of a problem, we'll just use the data that we've got. I think for the average person, you don't actually have that much, right? So you've got, on the one hand, people that there's a lot of data on, but it's probably not that representative of who they are personally because they're a media personality. And then you've got the ordinary person, and you're doing what? Taking Facebook posts and emails and stuff like that, and that's going to be your dad. Or,
how much do you text, Greg?
A good bit, but probably much less than most people, I would bet. Yeah.
And I'm just like, I feel like you could probably get a better representation of the younger generations than you can with the older, because we have that written record of so much of their just daily conversations, because that is a major form, or the major form of actual interaction.
I mean, that brings up another interesting thing. Maybe, so let's say you're a young person and you're turning 18 and you're, going to set, you're very prescient, and you're like, I need to set up a memorial bot just in case something happens to me. I'm going to go do a tough, dangerous job. And you're 28 when you die, right? Do you want all the pre-18 crap in there, that where you were saying stupid things all the time because you're a kid? Or do you want just the mature you to be the representative for your spouse, your children, your coworkers, anybody who's missing you, your parents, Right. I mean, your parents might want the dumb kid, right? Because that's how they remember you. But your spouse doesn't want that idiot, 16-year-old who is obsessed with this particular band or something.
Maybe you'll have to make sliders.
Oh.
It's like just an incorporation from 18 to current year, or maybe you move that up to 25 to current year.
I mean, that's feasible, right?
Yeah, it is. You're going to get less data there because you're curtailing the data set, but it is possible.
Yeah. So I think we're going to probably see quite a few of these. Where do you sit? Like, can you envision, choosing to make a memorial bot or enabling that for yourself to?
Oh, totally doing that.
To help. Now, what would be is it like a little bit of ersatz immortality, or is it to console your loved ones, or what would be the point of it for you?
One, just the technological challenge of it. Two, a little bit of immortality. There's we want to have some record of our existence. To go into the nothing is sometimes a
well, you're still going
a daunting task.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, totally am. But without having any sort of
memorial or legacy. Yeah.
There's one thing to have a tombstone, but that's a piece of rock in a place over whatever's left of me. That's not me. And at least a memorial bot is a closer simulacrum of me. And who knows? Maybe at some point in time, that is good research material. It might be something that someone could use later.
That's true, and that's kind of an interesting feature. It's sort of like in Futurama, where they have the The heads in what, like
jars.
Jars, that's right. Yeah, and you go in and you can talk to Abraham Lincoln or Captain Kirk or whoever,
Right.
and gain
Tricky Dick.
their wisdom. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Nixon plays a pretty significant role, doesn't he?
Agnew.
Yeah.
Yes, it's great. Sorry.
So what do
blowing people's ears out there?
There are a few other uses of memorial bots that are more politically oriented. So I'm kind of keen to see what you think about this. There's two in particular that have been used not to create avatars, but to create voices of people who were killed. One was from the Florida Parkland shooting in 2018. It was a teenager, a senior, who was killed, and they created an AI robocall with a message script in his voice. And his parents were cool with that. They were like, yeah, go ahead and do that. And it's kind of eerie to listen to. There's also another recent one, a 10-year-old who was killed in the 2022 elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. And so, I mean, what do you think? The victims wouldn't have given consent to this. Now they're children, so of course the parents can give consent. But do you think that this should qualify as a memorial bot? Or if you start using memorial bot for other purposes, does it quit being that and become a different kind of bot? Like let's say you had a memorial bot of dad or something, and you're like, this guy's really funny. We'll like have him say crazy crap, and then we'll like put it with an avatar and put it on YouTube. I don't think it's a memorial bot at that point anymore.
So I guess if you're thinking of it as like a snapshot, photo or an image or video, like that's one thing. That's straight up a memorial, and like it's only going to tell you things that it's in its data set.
Okay, yeah.
I'm going to add a third category here, which is you take a memorial bot and you meld it with some sort of AI that allows it to also see the world happening and try to make decisions based off of the data set of the memorial bot, and then them making decisions. And then the third one, which is you saying, is basically using that memorial bot and then sticking words in its mouth.
Yeah,
and so it's not part of the data set, and that feels a little bit icky to me, because it's like going and making a memorial bot of Abe Lincoln and like having him sell you used cars.
Yeah. The second one that you mentioned, though, is really quite interesting, because you could imagine, so a parent has a child who dies, and I don't know, the kid is 6 years old, right? And you're like, I've got all this data of them up until that point, but I'd like them to grow up and have, experiences of their own. So you add in the other AI that could mature and develop.
Right.
It's not really your kid anymore. It's now something different, but you could have an attachment to it,
Yeah. And so I think this really came to a question you asked earlier, for people that are dealing with mourning. How does this stunt the ability for you to properly mourn? And I would say I could definitely see that to be an issue that people will run into, that they will choose not to mourn, or this is one of the criticisms that are sometimes thrown at religions that have an afterlife, is that it removes the need for someone to properly mourn the loss of someone, because they are sure that they're going to see them later. And so similarly, there's an issue with not going through the process of coming to terms with that these people are gone and you're not going to interact with them ever again.
Yeah, that's quite true. I wonder if you could have, like, you fully understand that this is just a memorial bot and still go through the grieving process, and you're like, I still like having them around, I know that it's a fake. But I think it would be hard to resist the temptation to start to like slide into treating it as a real person,
Maybe a waiting period, like 5 years or something.
That's an interesting proposal. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, 5 years, that's kind of long.
All right. 3? 2?
I mean, some sort of waiting period. You don't want people to like say, yeah, I just buried the wife. Can't wait to have wife 2.0. Push the button. There she is,
Right.
That seems like a bad idea. And so this is a good segue into talking about the next sort of bot, psychotherapy bots. These are out there. And, if we want to be kind of loosey-goosey about this and set the bar super low, we could say that ELIZA, which was this program finished in 1967, could have been the first psychotherapy bot. And, I actually, when I was a kid, I learned BASIC and I programmed ELIZA into a computer. It wasn't very hard or very long. It's not a great program. And when you see how it works, it's basically, like the psychotherapist who you say, yeah, I'm having trouble at work. And then it takes that string and it says, how do you feel about I'm having trouble at work? Or some stuff. It's totally useless really for any sort of psychotherapy. But in the 1990s, they began to develop computer programs that would, walk users through really scripted procedures in cognitive behavior therapy. And CBT lends itself to that. It's not super dialogical. Like, a lot of other forms of talk therapy are. There are a lot of scripts. And now there's all these platforms and apps out there like Woebot. And there's a couple other ones that are out there that people are using. And
although Woebot was before the whole large language models, and so.
Oh, really? It's that old? That's interesting.
Yeah. It might be very early on, but it's pre ChatGPT coming online, which was basically
the game changer, right?
The game changer, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Greg, would you sit down with a bot that said, "Hello, Greg. Tell me about your relationship with your mother"?
Well, I laugh about it in part because, I've gone to a lot of therapists over the course of my life for, one thing or another. And I would say and this is not scientific at all, but I would say maybe 1 out of every 5 that I've worked with was actually helpful. A lot of them, they've got their shtick and they're going to do that and they'll try to shoehorn you into it. So how is that very different than having a bot doing that to me, right? So the bar is very low already. Now, could a bot really do what a really effective therapist can do? Definitely not at this point. I mean, I don't think but I could see how if I needed an accountability person because I'm trying to work on something, a bot could be useful for that.
Yeah, I'm going to skip forward to our next section just for a half second. There's companion bots is our next section, and Replica, which is an AI companion who cares and is always here to listen and talk and is always on your side. And that last bit is the thing that makes me hooray, you've got someone that, because hey, should I steal some money from the gas station by holding up? Yeah, go for it, Dan. It'll be really great.
It might even say something like, generally, stealing is viewed as wrong in advanced societies. However, in your case, you're special. You're an exception, and you should go do whatever will suit you. Yeah. I mean, a therapist shouldn't be doing that, right? A therapist should ideally be calling you on stuff. But I don't know that these bots are sophisticated enough to tell when you're lying to them or hiding stuff.
What, people lie to their therapists? No way.
All the time. I mean, sometimes they're lying to themselves. They don't even know that they're lying, right?
Yeah, and a good therapist will be able to recognize that and pull it out and call them out on it. We to continue on, we've got psychologists based on ChatGPT, and Character AI, which is a website that is based on the back end of it is ChatGPT, has over 3.5 million people visit daily, which that's amazing. There's a lot of people our stigma against therapy has so reduced that we have such a large amount of people, but the cost of getting into it is obviously prohibited, and so people are going to look for these. And so yeah, like the message is, are you feeling okay? Or all of these things that these chatbots feel, people say make them feel heard, can be very useful.
What do you make of that? One of the things that we had in the notes is about Reddit and people saying that just using ChatGPT, they felt like ChatGPT was hearing them. I mean, I can see where that's coming from. I don't have that sensation myself, but I suppose a lot of people probably do feel that way, right?
I think
and if it has the effect of feeling heard, and that's what you really want, that's probably going to be a positive psychologically, right?
I think this is partly on us as humans, and the skill of conversating well, and to not just waiting your turn to say something, but to try to ask deep questions is one. It's a skill. You have to learn how to do it well, and two, it sometimes feels difficult, and like especially we're all in our heads all the time, and we have all these things that we have to say. We have to say that to someone, and if someone else is saying things, then there's a desire for us to like stop them saying things so you can say things.
So is where you're going with this like saying, well, bots could give us more conversational space because they'll listen and then we get to talk more and we don't have to like burden another human being with all of our nonsense?
Now that you say it, absolutely. Like that is a natural consequence of what that is. But I was also like, there's also a lot of people that you have conversations with, which it's very difficult to have those types of conversations in the first place, where you actually feel heard.
I wonder, if you had sophisticated enough AIs that are like decades away from where we are, maybe they could be mediators in difficult conversations like that, Yeah,
like the therapist is like, now, like a couples therapist is like,
exactly,
the wife said this. What do you respond? What did you hear from that? and get them to
Yeah, see, that could be done as sort of scripts, right?
Yeah, that's fairly simple and straightforward.
That's an interesting one because I don't see applications like that out there quite yet. But if we can think of it, somebody's probably designing it.
The couples therapist bot.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into companion bots. So, this is where I think a lot of people in their heads immediately jump to like sex robots, but we're not going to get to that quite yet. Let's think about more benign and less X-rated forms of companionship. So, what do people want? It could be like pets, friends, people that geek out about the kind of stuff that you're interested in, somebody just to chat with you over tea. And then we can have, like romantic or sexual partners. And what is it that we're actually looking for? So like, there's this Paradoll, which is an AI companion app that's come on the market. And, it says that it can make its users feel cared, loved, and cared, understood, and loved. And the understood, okay, so we talked about that already a little bit, but the sense of being cared for and loved. Now, you could have a bot saying, I love you, I love you, I love you, click, 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 I love you. That's not going to be very effective, right? But if it has enough of an interaction, how do we show love? People talk about different modes of that, like listening to me ramble on about 1970s and 80s heavy metal bands. That could be a way of showing love, right? Yeah, right?
Especially if they're not super into it, but they love you.
Yeah.
And so actually I was thinking like companion bots and memorial bots I feel are going to be something that are going to merge. And so, because like you can have these companion bots, but if you had a companion bot that also had the memories of your childhood friend who I don't know, maybe they moved away, maybe they became a person that you don't like anymore, but you really liked the interactions you had as a kid with that person, and then throw that into the model.
Yeah.
It's like, man, Jesse, it was so. We used to have these amazing conversations all the time, and now you're a finance broker, and all you want to talk about is, I don't know, Fagwara. Yeah.
Your car. Yeah. Cars and trips you took, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting idea. You could customize these in a number of different ways. I guess the key is to have enough data to make it believable, but you're always going to be like projecting stuff onto these bots anyway, right?
And I guess I look at these companion bots, and so I see them as like, you can use them in a number of ways. One, you can use them as like a substitute. And so this is a way for you to remove yourselves from a social world. You don't either have the skills, or you just feel like everyone's against you or something. And so you're like, I'm going to isolate myself, but this is my social outlet. And then you have those people that potentially use it as an augment. And then a third level or a third group, and this probably is not all of them, but a place for someone to learn how to develop those social skills in a good way so that they can actually be useful to go back into the real world and interact well in social situations there.
How would the second one, the augment, work? Is that you're imagining it's like you are dealing with other people, but the robot AI is there alongside you to help you out? Or
so you've heard of like the people that have like pets. And part of the reason why they have pets,
service animals,
is to talk to them. Like they have a desire just to talk to someone. Yeah. And you could have maybe you have a relationship, and your partner just does not want to talk. Like that's very, very socially energy draining for them to be constantly talking. And so you could potentially have like, I want to maintain my relationship with my significant other. They don't want to talk to me all the time. Maybe I can talk to this and at least get that out.
But I do want to talk all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or they don't want to hear me talk about trains anymore.
Or 70s metal bands.
Yeah. I'm fortunate in that I have a spouse who's into that too. So, it's like the Skeletor meme, right? Where he's like, joke's on you. I'm into that stuff.
Yes. I love Skeletor.
Well, I mean, this is actually a good kind of segue, and we're talking about substitutes, to talk about something that's going to happen and probably is already going on, sex bots. And, you could really think about two different kinds, right? So there's ones that are online, and they are a bot, but there's no like physical presence to them. And, you can have them talk dirty or indulge fantasies or things like that and feel like you're interacting with a person. I don't know how stereotypical these are. I imagine that they're probably like way over the top with things. But, there's perhaps some useful applications for this. People who are not able to be in a relationship for one reason or another. Maybe this can also help people with confidence,
Hopefully.
And then we've got like robots, or Real Doll is actually at this point in time claiming that they're making sex dolls with artificial intelligence. And, how much could there be? Well, I don't know. But, a lot of these things we can project 10, 20 years ahead and say, it's probably more realistic then. So, what do we do with these? Do we, people are going to do all sorts of awful things to these bots. Do we want to grant like certain rights or create rules and say this is okay, this isn't, because especially if we think in terms of sentience, if any of these things actually do become self-aware, they're probably not going to be super cool with people doing whatever they want to them. I mean, that's what some of the replicants in Blade Runner, were sex models. Think about Pris,
Right.
She didn't seem to be so into it after a while, and understandably so, I think.
Yeah. I think that is one of the main issues we're going to have to deal with is at what point do we call these things, sentient is the term that's often used in sci-fi, but I actually like sapient because it's wise. Sentient just has sensations and response, and this is just me being pedantic. But the same idea is, like, at one point in time, do we say that these things are advanced enough that they deserve certain rights and protections, and
that they could have self-esteem or a sense of who they are, and that could be damageable. Yeah.
I don't think we're there yet. Regardless of whatever that one Google engineer said. But it is definitely, I think it's on the horizon. I don't know how far out it is, but that's going to be a thing that we're going to have to do, because now we're going to, if that happens, then we're going to all of a sudden bring into a fold a wholly new type of organism that has never had even the slightest bit of thought of having rights. Like, we have animal rights and whatnot, because they share with us a little bit of our intelligence or wisdom, or however you want to put it, rationality.
Or vulnerability to harm, too.
But if it's only harm, then we would probably need to give them rights earlier than add some understanding. Because how would you define harm in that? Like, they can feel harm. You put a sensor on it, and then it has to have rights.
Yeah. I mean, in sci-fi, they'll talk about, well, for example, there was this very interesting series about AI gigantic tanks called the Bolos that Keith Laumer wrote about. And they were, like unstoppable killing machines. But the trouble was they'd walk into like ambushes and get nuked and stuff like that. So what they did is they gave these things pain receptors. And, obviously it's not pain in exactly the same sense that you or I feel like if I poke myself in my eye or bite my tongue or something like that. But it would have damage. And then, there was like an algorithm that would say, this is bad for you. Don't do this. Try to avoid this and all that. And, we could easily imagine robots that they don't even have to be like involved in companionship. Maybe we give Roomba the ability to like not hurt itself or something like that. But once we do that, if it's analogous to human pain, we have now crossed a threshold, right? And we could talk about other affective matters. I mean, if they can feel pain, then why not give them the capacity for pleasure or well-being or contentment or something else like that? Or why not give them emotions like fear, or without giving them anxiety, just fear by itself, right? Or, I don't know, maybe anger or happiness or curiosity, right? Once we start doing that, if it really works, and that's a big, that's like, I think we'd have to give them some sort of recognition. And the way that we do that typically now is in terms of rights and rules, right? Could there be other kinds of recognition? I suppose, but legally that's how we parse it out these days.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, and Neuromancer by William Gibson. They have the Turing police, and they hunt down and find the rogue
AIs
and destroy them. And then another sci-fi series, the Culture series, they create these AIs, the brains and minds. They would scoff at you calling them AI because they're so much more advanced than that.
That's true. Yeah. And they run things. I mean, they're handling things that humans can't possibly do with populations that are in the trillions and very complex.
But like
machinery.
At the early the early time frame of the culture as a civilization, they realized that these things were advanced enough that they ought to be granted certain rights, and they become full citizens within the culture. And they do run things, so they're kind of a more equal citizen than others, but make sure that everyone has a good life.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a few other kinds of potential bots. So, customer service, government agencies are using chatbots. Some of them are pretty crappy. Some of them are pretty good. And, imagine that you would hype these up and maybe use an LLM to make them seem more human-like. Now they're there for a particular service, and they're really, they are owned by the governmental agency or the corporation or whoever's using them. Do we at a certain point start to say, I want to interact with Jimmy, the bot that helps me out when I got to do my taxes, or, I got to return some items. Is Susie available? Because when Lucy handles it, she messes everything up, but Susie really gets me, or something like that, right?
Are these Susie and Lucy, are these bots?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those would be bots that you have a negative or positive relationship with.
Yeah, because this is a thing, they've been adding them into LLMs, the memory and how far back and how many different tokens you can remember from previous interactions. And yeah, if you can build a relationship with a bot, I think that's a totally valid thing. But the question is, what about there's a company that had over 300 people in customer service, and they got rid of all but 10 of them, and just used some LLM with a text-to-speech to deal with all their things. Are these jobs so low-hanging fruit that
I kind of know where this is going,
them?
I think.
Or are there, I guess I'm slightly worried. I don't want to be a Luddite because I do love me my technology, but there's a trajectory. It's kind of like when environments change. If they change too fast, then you get extinctions because the organisms in them cannot adapt fast enough to deal with the changing environments. Are we in a place where we are potentially changing our system so fast that it's going to cause lots of harm and suffering to our human population currently?
I mean, at least with this one, there's an interesting thing. Cory Doctorow wrote about this recently, and I don't remember what the title of the article was, but he went through and he looked at a lot of companies that did exactly the sort of thing that you're talking about, where they got really bullish about AI, and they're like, well, we don't have to keep all these staff here. Well, let's just have AI handle it, right? And he found on average, when you fire people and replace them with AI, you generally need to hire 1.5 times as many people as the ones that you fired. Now, why would that be the case? Well, because the AIs, at least the ones we have right now, they make a lot of dumb mistakes. And you've already fired the people who knew what they were doing. Now you got to hire some fresh people who don't quite know what they're doing. And they have to oversee these janky AIs that are going off in not going completely rogue, but screwing things up. And you have to have them overseeing them and then fixing the mistakes that they make. Now, will that hold forever? Or, maybe you could replace the overseers with super AIs or something like that. That's possible, right? But at least for the time being, if you want a viable company, you can switch to AIs. There's just a big cost to do so.
Well, here's an interesting thing. It's been proposed that one of the easiest jobs to replace with AI would be the CEO.
Oh, right, yeah. That doesn't happen.
Hey,
much,
that sounds pretty good. All the workers that are doing the actual work that runs the company day to day, all of a sudden get whatever the CEO is making in their package. That sounds like a pretty good trade-off for me.
I mean, even if they don't get it, it would still be gigantic cost cutting, right? And you could get rid of a lot of VPs too, I think.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Well, before we run out of time, let's talk about a few other ones. So, medical bots, right? This is happening as well. Medical providers and companies and networks are using these to do kind of I don't want to say the word triage because that does, in a medical context, have an emergency room connotation, right? But it is sort of triage. Can we get you through the stuff so that we can figure out whether that rash that you've got really does need to be looked at or not? I think we're going to see more and more of these, and that seems to be stuff that's fairly easy to program well,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of very repetitive kind of menial tasks that these can be a godsend for us. They're going to be, allow us to do the more deep learning, or not deep learning, deep thinking, problem solving that we're really good at. But there's so many people that just employ that, like, check if it's stamped. Okay, then put the signature here and check off these 3 things and pass it to the next guy.
Yeah.
That these things aren't necessary.
I think you're right about that. Now, training people to be good at that higher level stuff, that's a great, jump into pedagogy. We don't seem to be great at teaching students how to do that on the whole. I mean, we talk a lot about it, right? Everybody's teaching critical thinking in their classes, but really almost nobody is. And if you ask most of these people who are all about critical thinking, what's the actual definition or scope of that? They can't give you much of an answer that isn't quite circular. So should we turn teaching over to pedagogical bots? I mean, maybe we can do that for lower order stuff, right? You want to learn how to play guitar? A bot could teach you, maybe not lose its temper with you for your terrible playing, how to put your fingers in the right place and stuff like that. And then, you can go to the human being for more advanced stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes, if I can have a camera to look at my fingers if I'm trying to learn guitar, I think that'd be great. Like, I've got a piece of software that's quite good. It's like Rock Band, but it actually uses a real guitar. That's very enjoyable in that regard. And it will loop you all the places where you suck, because it knows when you suck. And it goes, well, this section here, let's just practice this for 14 or 40 times until you get it right.
And it's probably not going to say to you, like the instructor would be, that was terrible. It'll have a nicer way of doing it, right? So you don't feel so bad about sucking. And yeah, I mean, I could see something to that. Maybe for learning a language,
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Actually, this is something I was working on, I was messing around with earlier. Because you can use text-to-speech. I think Microsoft has a text-to-speech for talking with a ChatGPT.
Oh, interesting.
And you can ask it to speak in Spanish, and you can change the language mode to Spanish. So I was working on my Spanish, and I just want to have a conversation in Spanish. And that was actually very nice. But the other thing I could do, I could ask it to to respond to me in Spanish, and then also write out the English translation of what I just wrote in Spanish.
It's sort of like watching TV and getting subtitles, right?
Exactly.
Interesting.
And I found that to be a really, they say that conversation is one of the best ways to actually really ingrain language models. And, if you're, listening to a tape and it's repeat this thing, repeat that thing, you've got to find someone else that's at least at your level to have a conversation in Spanish with. I found that to be a very useful tool.
Do you think we could do this at higher levels where there still is some repetition and habit formation needed, but there's greater cognitive engagement needed, like analyzing arguments, for example, to see whether they're in logic, valid, invalid, sound, unsound, have a conversation with an AI who'd be like, okay, so here's the argument. What do you think about it? And then, when you screw it up, it'll be like, well, do you really think that's what you should focus on? And you'd be like, well, let me check it again, right? It would have little tricks and prompts and stuff like that. But the goal would be to teach you how to analyze arguments effectively.
I think that's absolutely that was at least in its wheelhouse, machine learning. What LLMs are built on, their main thing is for classification.
That's right, yeah.
And so if you can give it enough information to classify what basic forms of logic are, modus ponens or any of the logical fallacies, and then apply that to a large enough data set that knows, I assume there's I don't assume. I know that there's lots of arguments and then people like tearing them to shreds in responses, and you can just like, oh, like here's the polemic, and that'll be your data set against this other input set, and like be able to figure that out. I think that is totally within the realm of learning. That we already have.
What if we're turning to things that require us to think in terms of values or, work with interpretation? Like, let's say, come up with a good analysis of these historical documents. Now, the human being can do that, and oftentimes they're crappy at it, right? But sometimes they're pretty good. Could we develop a pedagogical bot that would actually promote that sort of stuff? And like when people make a dumb mistake, it actually realizes that and points it out to them, or says, how can we take this interpretation further? What is your evidence for the claims that you're making, or stuff like that? Do you see that as viable?
Eventually. That's a more nuanced technique, I would say, than just doing a straight like dissection of an argument.
You're not just classifying stuff, you're interpreting.
Yeah. And I'd say like with enough data and enough work on this, you're going to get to there. But looking at the rate of technological advancement, it's quite amazing to see like how incredible both the image generators as well as the chatbots have advanced over just the last year. And if you look at 5 years ago, they're like babies trying to crawl. Like they're totally inept.
I wonder if we come back to like where we started out. So there's going to be great advancements, right? Two of the questions we can ask is, will people be cool with going to a bot for these things? Like, it's clear that some people are going to be cool with companion bots. Do you want to get taught by a bot? To learn guitar, maybe, yeah. But to learn ethics, maybe not, right?
The question is, what was the data set for that ethics bot? Like,
exactly.
Are they like a hedonist or something? Is that like their main value system?
And so here's the other question when we think about pedagogy. So that's us as adults. Will parents be cool with their kids being taught by this kind of stuff? Some parents will be like, yeah, it's wonderful. I don't have to send my kids to school. They just like go into the learning bed and chat with their bot, but I think a lot of people will be a bit leery. But we're getting close to the end of our time. Do you want to take us out on a final thought?
Yeah. So before you all go to your learning beds for the evening, let me leave you today with the words of Fei-Fei Li. I often tell my students not to be misled by the name artificial intelligence. There's nothing artificial about it. AI is made by humans, intended to behave by humans, and ultimately to impact humans' lives and human society.